Why, hello everyone, this is Soul with another video, and today I'm going to be doing the recap for the January 24th Q&A, starring Ian Hazzikostas and his best buddy, Josh Allen, aka Lore. Just like all the other Q&A recaps, this is going to have a podcasty sort of format. I'm going to have the questions up here on screen, but for the most part, you can feel free to just have a listen as I read the questions, give the abridged answers that they gave, and I'll follow that up with some reactions and responses from me. So let's get started with the first question. Any specifics for the release timeframe of Cooldown and Zandalari? Both races are going to be available day one of patch 8.15, which is going to equate to something like 7 months after launch. So in terms of people who are really salty about Zandalari Trolls not being available at launch, like what we had kind of sort of expected it to, well, that's what we get. As it turns out, according to Ian, the reason why Zandalari Trolls aren't going to be available like we thought that they were going to is all because of the Alliance. Thanks, Alliance. Seriously though, it was not originally planned that Cooldown were going to be available as an allied race at all for Battle for Azeroth, which, to be honest, in hindsight, that would have been much worse if, in fact, one of the starring new races that were going to be introduced weren't going to be playable at all until like maybe the next expansion or so. So the team decided to make that decision. They decided, hey, let's have Cooldown be a thing. Unfortunately, since we kind of decided this quotes last minute, that's not going to be a thing until 8.15. So the best way to align that together is to make Zandalari and Cooldown join at the same time. So the exchange is that the Mag'har Orcs, which was originally designed to be released with 8.15, that turned out to be released at the beginning, which kind of makes me wonder about the whole narrative of how the expansion was going to play out and how it eventually will. Now, recall that the Mag'har Orc scenario is very meaty in terms of lore. It gives some very interesting revelations about the Draenei and the fate of everyone on Draenor, period. There are some interesting little tidbits that I'm not going to spoil just in case you really want to know about it on your own that have to do with the Draenei, the alignment of light, and just what are they up to. So it kind of reframes what's coming in 8.15 with some of this old god stuff that we're going to be introduced with, as well as what could have been the stuff with the Mag'har Orc scenario and some of the revelations of the light. At any rate, though, it does suck that there are many players that I've seen in chat and forums and elsewhere who are really dissatisfied that Zandalari Trolls weren't available as was originally planned. We can call them liars, we can call this whole incident a bait and switch or an Activision sort of conspiracy to keep us subscribed, so that way when Zandalari Trolls are available, it'll get people to resub and then the MAUs go up and whatever. It is an interesting little bit of insight to know that just creating a race takes up so many developer resources that these sorts of decisions end up being very, very impactful for players when the game finally gets into our hands. Next question. Can you explain the rationale behind Alliance getting the opportunity for item level 400 gear this week and likely every week we're engaging in world PvP? Ian was kind of all over the place when answering this one, but at least with regards to the question, the quest to get this item level 400 gear, it's not going to come as frequently as every week, and also after this week, at least that's what's expected, it's not going to be item level 400 gear, it's probably going to be 385 gear. However, this does not mean that whatever gear that people had received, it's not going to be just taken away, it's not going to be downgraded or anything like that. What you got is what you got, and this is just Blizzard being like, okay, cool, you got it. In the grander scheme of things, though, I really don't agree with using incentives to entice players to get into world PvP. I really don't think that that players should be rewarded, or that rewards should be the thing that draws players in. And if anything, there was a part where Ian said that he wants to encourage Horde players to actually opt out of world PvP because of the rewards, or because they're getting their butts kicked or whatever. Just my opinion, but adding these positive rewards doesn't necessarily equate to a positive outcome. In fact, I think that this causes unintended behavior from people who are participating in war mode, not because they want to be in war mode, but because they want to get the thing, the reward that they get inside of it. So I largely agree with many of the arguments that are coming out there that the underrepresented faction shouldn't get some sort of welfare item or reward for participating. War mode is PvP, and I think that the ultimate reward should be something that is, well, PvP related. So in my opinion, instead of getting a reward at all, or at least a direct item reward, it should just be conquest or something like that. It goes with my the entire foundation of my argument is that the reward for PvP should be more PvP. There should be a way to just perpetuate the fighting and to celebrate being able to just bash the enemy's face in. I don't believe that these kinds of rewards are the answer. Next question. Seeing as the Warmode bonus has been an unwavering 30% for the Alliance, does the team consider this to be a failure at balancing? Ian's response was that the initial launch of Warmode, and even some of these balancing acts that they were trying to do was their failure at balancing. But the current iteration with Season 2 and the Tides of Vengeance patch, that they're starting to see the fruits of their labor, that the gap between the number of Alliance versus the number of Horde is starting to thin out, and that eventually this 30% will turn into 25%, 20%, 15, and 10. I'm not sure though. I get that Blizzard takes a look at the very, very high level that we don't understand, the data, the numbers. They can see everything, but it doesn't quite translate when I turn on War mode and I want to do these assault world quests. I come in and I just get rolled over by a huge party of Alliance, and then I look at my buff and I still see, oh yeah, 10% because, Horde totally outnumbered the Alliance, right? And this actually segues into the next question. Let me read that. I've greatly enjoyed the 30% bonus as Alliance for War mode and almost never take it off. There's a lot of excitement when battles organically occur. However, the server lag is almost unbearable. Is anything being done about server stability? The short answer is yes, they're working on stuff, and they in fact plan to maybe sort of have some sort of either a dev water cooler or Q&A blog stream sort of thing, where they have someone come out and talk about some of the challenges that they encounter when it comes to server stability, the engineering side, and networking side of things. While embracing the idea of a PvP shard, I think it should be Blizzard's long-term goal to find a way to cram as many people onto a shard as possible. I mean, yes, there may be risk of lag, and it becomes a little bit detrimental to gameplay when there are too many people on screen. It gives almost no meaning to a melee who just feel bad. They just run in and die. And then you just see big death ball battles, I guess. But when you have full 40-man raids who are dominating a certain area in a certain shard, and you're just kind of hoping and praying that the next death ball that it's on your side shows up and that they could actually fight against each other, I don't quite think that's the best way to go. One thing that Lore pointed out that I think is extremely important is that if you do encounter lag at any point, you should report it right away. I mean, it's one thing to go onto a forum and start and write up some meme about lol lag, fix your server's blizz, that sort of thing, but it's not nearly as effective as just putting out an effective report that tells you what time it happened, when it happened, and so on and so forth. So that way, server engineers can go in, take a look at logs, and try to identify these problems. When it comes to lag and stability, I'm sure you and I both know we've seen instances where we would ask people, hey, is anyone lagging? Because my shit is awful, and everyone would say, no, I'm cool. Maybe it's you. Maybe you should stop downloading the porn and all that. So Blizzard knows that there's a problem. They're working on it, but they're also asking for our help to report problems whenever they arise. Next question. With Cool Tyrants, Zendalari, and possibly more allied races coming to Azeroth, would you consider just letting us have all our character slots on a single realm? Currently, there are a maximum of 50 characters you can make on an account. According to Ian in 815, they may in fact allow 50 slots on a single realm. And that's it. His answer was basically yes. Can we get a way to transfer war resources from our main to our alts, like we had in Legion? Funny enough, the answer again was yes. Just like we were able to in Legion, we can spend a number of resources to receive less resources, but those are going to be considered account bound, I'm sure, and then we can trade them over to our alts. Can we get a Valor point-like system which we can use to upgrade gear? I understand the argument for Titan Forging, but now I've went 7 weeks with no upgrade, as unless it's Titan Forged, it's useless for the whole raid, and not just myself. It's a really demoralizing system. Unfortunately, Ian said, no. Actually, he kind of swallowed his mic. He was like, no. The reasoning behind it was interesting and yet incomplete, because he went through kind of the history of Valor Points or Justice Points, whatever you want to call them, and the challenges that those systems faced. Using a like totally bleeding edge casual as an example, someone who just does like LFR or normal mode rating and like that's it. If they were able to do the LFR or normal mode rating in this particular tier in the Battle of Dazar lore raid, and then by the end of the tier they'd be decked out in like 420 gear, what is that going to mean when the 8.2 raid comes out? That means that the kind of content that they would normally do, it's not going to matter for them. The only point of getting that gear is to hold on to it so you can upgrade that stuff, so you can exceed the content for the raid that's coming after that. So I get it when Ian explains that that's a pretty crappy way to play, knowing that you're going to be doing content for the sake of not getting a cool item, but you're getting an item that will eventually be cool because I'm going to upgrade it over the next couple of weeks or so. But like I said, the explanation wasn't quite complete because we could always design a way around that, such as we can have upgrade limits to avoid that kind of situation. So it is encouraging, Ian said, that something like this is not entirely off the table, that there's more to design and iterate on. We just need to have that good idea that can be put forward. Next question. What's the reasoning behind the huge jump in power level between tiers? Wouldn't 370 normal, 385 heroic, and 400 mythic make more sense than the absurdity now? Ian kind of addressed this in the previous question, but the more general answer to this question is that 15th item level just is not enough. I'll use myself as an example in this case. So my paladin's item level is around 380 or so. That's going to negate all of normal mode, which I use for my team to be like, hey, let's get our feet wet in the new raid. Let's try to understand the mechanics. It wouldn't feel very good going in there just to understand mechanics and not really get a great reward other than maybe transmog, which I personally value, but not everyone does. And even then, once we do graduate from a normal and get into heroic, 385 for real, that's it. I'm gonna get a whopping 5 item level or so, unless stuff Titan forges, and that would be what the game is then entirely balanced around, just Titan forging. And that is something that, at least these days, with the way Titan forging is quite a bit more rare than it used to be, it just wouldn't make the game feel very balanced or fulfilling. That said, I know this is kind of a half-assed thought, but I still kind of wish that they just remove normal mode just straight up and made it so that, hey, cool, if you can't handle the jump between LFR and the heroic mode, which would be the new normal mode, if you can't handle that, then hey, get yourself some gear from World Quest or Mythic Plus. Can PvP please get some sort of vendor? It feels like we're forced to PvE in order to PvP due to how important stats are again and how bad PvP drops are. Ian's answer, at least for now, is no. They want to keep going with this kind of this amalgam of a reward system where you fill up a bar, you complete a quest, and you get choices between certain selections. I think Blizzard is trying to do its best to give players a semblance of control without having to funnel them into certain things. And actually, when they were talking about having rating requirements in order to get the weapon, this certain piece of armor or this weapon or whatever, it was kind of the same thing. With a vendor, as soon as you got the number of points or as soon as you got a certain amount of points, you were choosing between what was the most efficient thing to get at the time. Whereas right now, you get that one piece a week, but instead, you're choosing between the thing with the best Azerite traits, the thing with the best kinds of stats that are for your certain class or spec. They did at least acknowledge that with this current system, that if there is a problem where a player is choosing between certain selections of gear and the secondary stats that they really want are not present in that gear, they do acknowledge that that's a problem with a certain class or spec being dependent on those stats, and not necessarily a problem with this entire gear distribution system. That said, this is complicated, man. Okay, I would say it's not complicated, but it just seems really convoluted and confusing. It's just weird, and a vendor just still, despite what Ian says, it's just easier to understand. Now in practice, as a not super dedicated PvP person, but someone that just wants to fill up that bar, it's easy for me to work with. So I can't be as brave as some people and say objectively that this is bad or that this is fantastic. But I will respond to Ian's reasoning that they want to make the rewards from PvP kind of similar to how PvE rewards are, where you kill a boss, maybe you get something cool and maybe you won't. I don't think that they should have that sort of consistency. Let PvP have its own way of obtaining gear. Let PvE stuff, let raiders and whatnot have their own system of getting stuff. And if that certain audience is happy, then run with that. But let's go to the next question. When are Mythic Plus seasons going to give rewards other than a hidden achievement? Pandaria and Warlords had some nice challenge mode rewards. BFA has nothing cool like that. I don't know if soon is on the table, but they do have intentions, or they do acknowledge that, yes, this is kind of an inconsistency and they want to meet that. They pointed out that in Mob and in Warlords that they gave cosmetic rewards that were unique to the entire end of experience, whereas with Mythic Plus it's more like an ongoing deal where you're getting some really good gear, and then on top of that you get the feat of strength like whoop-de-doo. So I think it is cool that they're going to add even more to that, because they do acknowledge, and I think this is a great thing, that Mythic Plus is going to be considered a pillar of endgame progression. So now that we're seeing more, even more embracing from Blizzard with this, as well as like the MDI and whatnot, I think that while Mythic Plus isn't my kind of gameplay, I have to admit, I'm glad that it's there. Next question. Are there any plans on how to address the problem that some class mechanics are pretty much mandatory for high-level keystones, such as Rogue Shrouds? Why are there no crafting items that have the same effect, like with Bloodlust drums? I think that the answer to this was actually pretty cool. Now, what they wanted to do was, one, they wanted to make it so that shrouds aren't everything. The quick strategy is that, yes, I can skip this really dangerous pack and things can be a little bit easier. But of course, because you need to have a certain completion rate, then instead of killing that pack, then you're going to have to kill another pack. So there's an element of strategy there. So it's like saying, okay, if we have a rogue and we can skip this trash pack, I hope we have a shaman or something, because this other trash pack that we're going to have to end up killing, a shaman is like the best thing for it. Something like that. But I think the cooler part of this answer came from the idea that, yes, rogues do have something that they bring to the table. They want to make it so that multiple classes or specs have something unique that they can give to the table. So that if we just look at this from just like a purely list standpoint, if Shroud is something on the list, as well as like a battle res, they want to have a number of really, really awesome things that we want to have in your group comp, but the inevitability that you can't have everything. So in a way, this hopes to elevate multiple classes and specs, maybe not all of them, but maybe a lot of them, to have some sort of really cool thing that they can bring to the group that no one else can. And now the next question. Will there ever be a way to punish players that abandon Keystone runs midway? It's frustrating when pugs frequently apply and then bail during the progression of the key wanting a free carry. The short answer is no, followed by a we haven't quite thought of what would work best yet. And part of it is because there is no way to have Blizzard's invisible hand play a factor in these kinds of interactions without having some sort of loophole or exploit that would allow some crazy amounts of abuse. Now, it is really frustrating when someone leaves for a frivolous reason. But is it necessarily Blizzard's responsibility to handle those kinds of situations, or is it our responsibility to better vet groups or to better manage expectations? The framing of this question literally applies to pugs, where this sort of content, high-level keystones and whatnot, it may not necessarily, the intended audience, it appears in Blizzard's eyes, is that this is more for a closer group of comrades, people that you bond with, people that you party with more regularly than the total stranger that you just met. After all, it is much less likely that your guildmate is going to bail on you, because after they bail on you for that run, well, they're still in the guild. Ian did also acknowledge that there does come a point where a run just doesn't work out. Who's going to get punished for it? So there are social, people-related problems that can't necessarily be resolved with a system or a feature. But he did bring up something kind of interesting, something similar to the end of matches in Overwatch, where you can upvote your favorite person. I think that having a positive upvote system would be helpful. It definitely would be detrimental if there was like a downvote system. It's like, oh, don't take that person. But for those times when you're in a group and you do pretty well, if you have an opportunity by the end of the run to give an upvote to like 2 people that you think were like exceptional during that run. I think that would be cool. As for like the long-term benefits or the long-term repercussions of that, that's something that I haven't really thought of yet, but it's something that's worth thinking about in a possible future video. But in the meantime, let's get to the next question. The transmog in BFA leaves a lot to be desired. When are you bringing back class-specific sets? 1 set for each armor type is not enough. This question gets asked way too much, and why do they keep answering this this question? I get it. There are people that don't like these certain sets, or I guess more importantly, they don't like the lack of variety between these sets. It does kind of suck that for a Death Knight, a Paladin, and a Warrior, it's all going to have that kind of like big old, that big neck or whatever it is that you're going to see in Uldir or in the Battle of the Zar lore. But as for bringing back class-specific sets, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of, I do agree with Ian that I'm tired of trying to look at what's this next iteration of the Paladin armor set. It's gotten boring, it's played out, it doesn't feel iconic, but again, this is just my opinion. The math, though, is not. Like the OP said, 1 set for each armor type is not enough. I just don't think that bringing back class-specific sets is the answer. So, why not just kind of meet things in the middle? Take Uldir, for example. The theme was supposed to be kind of Titan-esque themed, but at the same time, Uldir itself had, it was Titan themed, it was also kind of Old God themed, and it was kind of sort of Troll themed. So why not have 3-plate armor sets in that kind of style? In this scenario, I'm kind of using Blizzard's words against them. It's like, yes, they want to frame these armor pieces off of the theme of the raid that these pieces drop from. But can't there be multiple themes that you would get, or kind of multiple inspirations that you would get from this theme? Or at the very least, let's pretend that the chest is like the centerpiece of this particular raid set. But can't you have several alternating pieces, kind of like how we get with like the unique looking mythic model? Can't there be alternating sets that all just flow together well, but still have different looks for the purpose of customization? I guess the point I'm making is that no, it doesn't have to be class-specific sets, but having more variety is just good. I think the conversation should steer in that direction, so that way Blizzard has a harder time reacting to it, and then they can say something more pragmatic like, well, we only have so much time to have these kinds of sets, and we want to have like more Warframe sets or something, for example. Next question. Can we get more information about the direction you're taking the Heart of Azeroth and the systems that will be in place for 8.2 and beyond? If I knew that they were going to address questions like these, I would have talked about flying in war mode. Freaking A, dude. So Ian did give a really high level and unverified kind of example of what's possible. So the idea is that the Heart of Azeroth is going to act like our more traditional artifact weapons, where think of 7.2. Yeah, I think it was 7.2 when you got that extra little round medallion looking artifact expansion slot. So there might be something there where we would infuse it with artifact power, and on top of that, we would be able to unlock powers based on the things that we do. So there would be maybe there would be some sort of power that we would unlock from doing world quests, PvP, raids, islands, I guess. All these different kinds of activities will unlock these different kinds of powers, so that I think in Ian's example, you can hold out your Heart of Azeroth and zap enemies or something. And part of me wants to be like, dude, can I just throw it like a grenade and just chuck it at someone and watch it explode and then it comes back to me? I don't know. But that's about it. Ian did reiterate that the powers that we would get from our Azerite pieces, they're going to be considered fully unlocked, and that any of the artifact power progression is going to be centered on the amulet. Next question. Are there any plans to further curb Titan Residual funneling? It's still fairly easy for organized guilds to run single armor type raids and stockpile tons of Residual for next season. I'm kind of with Ian with this, where you got to ask yourself, okay, how easy is it really to get an entire raid of 20, 30 people or so to all use the same armor type and then funnel gear to one person, namely you? I don't think it's considered easy, but it is kind of worrisome to see that this sort of behavior is possible. It's just that while it affects the perception of what someone like me would look at and be like, wow, this person's fully decked out, or they have tons of residual ready for next season, in the grand scheme of things, this is more of a concern that you see on forums than what you see in game necessarily. This is week 1 of season 2, and there's already concerns of what's going to happen in season 3. I see this scenario as edge case. It's not going to be the regular practice of half of the raiding population to funnel gear in this way for the purpose of disenchanting this stuff or scrapping this stuff for residuum. But if this does turn out to be too big of a deal, I don't see any reason why Blizzard couldn't just cap residuum to like 10,000 or so, or at least whatever the maximum is in order to buy the most expensive thing from the vendor as it is right now. That way, when the new season starts, one, the scaling of residuum when it comes to how much you gain and how much stuff costs is going to go up by a factor of 10, and the most residuum that you'll be able to even stockpile is 1/10 of that. So that would be what I would do if I was Blizzard, if things did in fact get too out of hand. But it's affecting such a small element of the population, as in the most competitive side, that I don't think it's going to affect anyone at a lower level. Next question. What do you consider the biggest design challenges WoW is facing in the long term from a development point of view? Yes, I definitely should have asked like a lot more questions in the hope that that something like this would have been answered. This is as vague as you can get. So Ian tried to answer this question, but he pretty much talked about the world of Warcraft is hard. So he talked about, but it comes down to WoW being such a big game that there are so many competing schools of thought and so many competing play styles that alone is a challenge. When you're trying to cater to one audience, it pisses off another, and it goes back and forth in every which way direction. It was either Ian or Laura or both of them who said that this game would be easier to design around if the focus was much more narrow. So if this game wasn't about PvP, or if it wasn't about dungeons, it was just raid or die, then yeah, it would be easier to balance to that particular audience if you're willing to sacrifice that entire audience of people who care about only certain things. That's the burden that Blizzard chooses to put upon themselves. I mean, if Blizzard wanted to make a very sandboxy game like as if it were EVE Online, okay, cool, they could do that, but then they would be abandoning everyone who isn't interested in that sort of thing. It would have been nice, though, if Ian got very specific and at least talked about one point in an effort to encourage folks like us, commentators and players, to give their input on certain things. Like I did that recent video about long-term class growth. So it would have been great if Ian talked about, hey, one example is long-term class growth, and here's what we're wrestling with. That's the kind of thing that I would love to see in a developer water cooler or a Q&A, or not a Q&A, but a developer stream where we had a couple of developers or people from the WoW team talk about some of the challenges that they face and the things that they do on the day-to-day basis. But let's move on to the next question. What conversations have been held about the global cooldown change? Are you generally happy with how it's played out? According to Ian, overall, the global cooldown changes is something that they wanted to work towards, but they're definitely not done working on it. They're not done adding or subtracting abilities from the global cooldown, and they're still reiterating on what works best. Something really interesting that Ian mentioned, which was cool because I think one of my guildmates brought this up the other week, was a shaman's ascendance ability, where they pop it, but then they feel like they're doing nothing, and that doesn't feel good, especially if you're popping it as a healer and you're trying to get your team back up. You're using your global cooldown just to power yourself up like that. It's just not very good. So the idea that Blizzard has in this example is that popping Ascendance will cause a burst of healing that will heal targets around you, making it so that while Ascendance is still on the global, it does something when you press that button. And I think that's really cool, actually. So using a paladin as another example, because of course I want to use a paladin as an example. Avenging Wrath. It's something that's on the global cooldown. It kind of sucks that it's on the global cooldown. It's very inconvenient. But what if it was for a protection paladin? It was like either a minor defensive cooldown, or it caused a like a small bubble, a small damage absorption bubble when you hit it. That'd be kind of neat. For Holy, it does an effect kind of similar to the old Holy Radiance spell, and for Ret, I don't know, it hurts people. Okay. I think something like that is clever. It's simple, and it gives these buttons that are on the cooldown an immediate meaning, and not just, hey, I'm ready to do stuff. I already am. Next question. As a healer main, I find myself feeling forced into a DPS spec more and more, even in group content like islands and warfronts. Are you trying to get away from the Holy Trinity design? Can healers get higher DPS in PvE? So there were a couple of concerns that Ian brought up when trying to address this question, like, can healers get higher DPS in PvE? And that raises the danger of another like disciplined priest kind of scenario popping up, where, yeah, they're doing not only are they doing decent damage, but they're keeping themselves alive, and now they're unkillable, and that really sucks. Something like that too would threaten the viability of DPSers, whether it's PvE or PvP content, although I'd argue it's more on the PvP side of things. Part of the concern that I see here is that, for the most part, all the classes and specs have really effective toolkits, where people can keep themselves alive better, or they can heal themselves, or in the case of healers, they can do relatively decent DPS while having a lot of sustainability because they're a healer. When it comes to islands and warfronts, the whole thing about feeling useless as a healer there, it can mean one of two things. It can mean either the difficulty that you're doing the island at is too low, or that overall islands and warfronts just don't do enough damage to warrant having a healer, and that the damage should be going up. That kind of mindset also addresses the concern without having to go into this arms race between healers and tanks and DPSers to do decent damage, but still be viable, but still be sustainable. Revisiting the whole island and warfront thing, now there are mythic difficulties of islands that are out, and at least maybe in 8.2 we're going to see what are these so-called heroic warfronts, where perhaps the healing is in fact going to matter, at least for a while. And hopefully it will. And the final question, are there any major class changes in the works for 8.15? Nope, is pretty much what it sums up to. Ian needed to define the context of this question, the quote major class changes, as things that would change, like full-on change rotations. Like, hey, let's go ahead and revamp this, and instead of Holy Power, we'll go to Charges, or instead of Maelstrom, we'll go to Mana, or something like that. Big changes like that are considered expansion level changes. So I guess the bad news for certain classes like Shaman or some priests or whatnot is that no, they're not going to expect huge changes other than numbers, and that really sucks for people who are in fact dissatisfied with their class. With that said, I wouldn't be all that happy to see huge game-changing changes in the middle of an expansion, but for those who just aren't having a good time with their class, it just kind of sucks. So that about wraps things up. I want to thank you all for listening and watching. What were you doing watching? And to encourage you all to express your thoughts and feelings in a comment below. Please don't forget to like the video and to subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.